So this is what we're talking about if we're trying to store strings in our array. So we can organize the array by saying, let's create this array of this size. As you know, array creation requires either initialization list with curly braces, or a new operator, which then also requires you to tell how big the array should be. So then this is the syntax basically that allows you to store and retrieve information from your array. If we use a collection, and here is an example of ArrayList, very informally, we say, all right, let's have an ArrayList, and ArrayList is an alternative to our array, for example. Then you have to tell the ArrayList what type of elements you want to store. And those things, such as string here, the type of element for the array list cannot be int, cannot be double. It has to be an object. But again, in the future, we'll see that this is not really a big obstacle because there are primitive type wrapper objects which can be used. Okay. So we create this array list, and this is our reference to the array list in memory. And this time we create it as a normal object, and we need to provide this entire data type. Now this data type includes those less than, greater than signs, which are no longer called less than or greater than. Instead, they're referred to as angled brackets. Okay? So this is just another, so we have rounded parentheses, we have square brackets, we have curly braces, and we can use less than and greater than also as essentially a matching pair of punctuation characters which are being used here to specify the types that really make ArrayList a generic class, right? So if you think about it, you can create ArrayList of strings, you can create ArrayList of driver licenses, and so forth, right? So as long as you have a class which meets the minimal requirements to be stored inside the array list, you can create an array list of that type. Now, this type of object, generic, but using uniform elements. So if it's an array of strings, you cannot mix array of strings and add something other than a string to it. It would be a violation of this rule that essentially, to begin with, declares an array list to be an array list of strings, right? And with that in mind, the technical term for this kind of collection is that it's called homogeneous collection, right? Because it's using uniform type. Every element is of the same type, right? So, and truly, you can probably invent and try your own alternative, which would be a heterogeneous collection. But by default, all collections are homogeneous collections, which using a particular type, you specify it, and it makes it'll keep a list of those things internally, and it'll keep essentially this collection. Yes, question. Just let me say one more thing. So this entire piece here becomes the data type. So the data type includes the generic collection class that we're trying to use, but you instantly have to specify array list of what. So combined together, this becomes the type of object that we create. And that's why when we say new, right, we repeat this again, and we say, okay, new this. It's a little bit kind of redundant, and we can reduce this. I'll a little bit simplify it a little bit, but just the important thing is that when we talk about a generic class, it will include the name of the class, such as an array list, but also the name of another class or even a list of classes by which this thing is parameterized. And therefore, altogether, they formulate the type of data, the type of object that we would like to create. So question.
Yes, I heard you say that all collections were homogeneous, but then I thought I heard you say you could specify them as heterogeneous. Did I get that right?
Yeah, let me clarify.
If I didn't,
What I mentioned was that you can try to write your own class, your own Java class, and experiment with storing different types of objects inside of that class. But that would be entirely outside the topic outside of our discussion, focusing on standard Java API collections. So I'm not going in this direction. You can research and you can find classes that exist. You can research it online and find classes that do something like that. But this is not what Java API does for us. So all these things are pretty much uniform, because really the alternative to the fact that you have to deal with those uniform collections is that you can create an array of strings, and at the same time you can create an array list of something else and maintain them both side by side, and therefore there is really no need to mix the same data. After all, you can also create an object which serves as an aggregate type of other pieces of information, and just declare collection of that. So essentially, for the sake of simplicity, it's being organized as those uniform type of collections. Now, if on the previous slide here we saw the typical usage of an array by using the square bracket syntax to say, all right, I want to talk to the element 0, 1, or 2, then over here what you do is that you no longer just stuck with using index all the time. Recall that when you create this collection, this array list of codes is empty, right? We didn't specify anything to populate it with. So this particular array list named codes will be empty to begin with. And therefore, we can actually use another method which is available in a collection such as add, and it will be populating it sequentially. So sure enough, if we try to use index by saying get, then index will be 0, 1, and 2. But that's simply because we populated our array list with 3 elements already. So again, a very popular form of iteration is to basically say, let's go in, and the way generic collections are organized, it's kind of interesting, because we have a collection of strings. To be able to access those strings, you declare S to be a reference to a string. To begin with, it's just a reference, right? It would, in the future, will refer to something. And you can use the for loop, for each loop, specify the collection name, and inside the loop, S becomes your access to each element in that collection. Now, this is not the only way to access your elements, by all means, but if you have a very simple need to visit each string in your array list, then you can use this for loop and quickly access all of the elements just by doing what this example is showing. Okay, so there's a little bit of new syntax, but the good news is that when you write your own, if you decided to create your own generic class, there will be a little bit more of a syntax to deal with. But when you're using existing classes, existing generic generic classes in Java. It's extremely simple, and I think it's very intuitive. It's even better than array of strings. If you compare it to this, look at this syntax. It's completely obscure, right? Try explaining to someone that this little piece, new string 3, creates an array of 3 strings. Like, okay, all right, it's more, it's more terse. Whereas over here, if you want to tell someone, I am creating a list of strings, and you show them this code, it actually makes sense. It just, I think it's very intuitive when you use existing collections. This is a very good aspect of Java generics.